Welcome everyone. Let's get started. I am Laura Schroeder. I'm the head of brand and communications at Personio, and I'm very excited to be your host today for our webinar, Organizational Resilience as an HR Priority, with our expert panelists, who I will introduce in just a moment. Here's our agenda. Today, we'll do a short introduction to kick off the topic. Then I will introduce our panelists. We will have a discussion, and everyone on the webinar will be sharing their insights and expertise around organizational resilience and operational excellence at their companies. We will have time at the end for some question and answer session, and then we'll have a wrap up, and that will conclude our webinar today. So without further ado, let's get started. What do we mean when we talk about resilience? So if you are thinking of a person or a company, an individual or an organization, resilience is characterized by three attributes. And the first is a staunch acceptance of reality as it is rather than as we wish it would be. The second is an inner sense of meaning or purpose that helps navigate difficult times. And the third is the ability to improvise when things don't go according to plan. So taken together, these three characteristics define resilience. Now, the last year, because the pandemic has had such a large impact on both work and people, it not only put a spotlight on the importance of resilience, but it also spotlighted the role that HR has to play in enabling organizational resilience. So with that short introduction, I now, with great pleasure, introduce our three panelists. First, H.U.G, who is the head of people at Spendesk. Welcome, Agnes. So great that you could be with us today.
Hello, everyone.
Willem Kistemacher, who is an HR project manager at Basilea Pharmaceutica, and our own Ross Seychelles, who is the Chief People Officer here at Personio. Welcome to all of you. And now, since we're going to start the panel discussion, I'll go ahead and stop sharing my slides. And we get that gallery view. All right, so first question I'd like to ask the three of you around operational excellence. So efficient processes are the backbone of a resilient company. I'd like to learn more about what led to your decision to digitalize your HR processes. Was it HR-led, or was there an impulse from the executive suite, or was there something else going on in the market that drove that change? Agnes, why don't we kick off with you?
Yeah, sure. That's an interesting question, I guess. So for us, it's been driven by different things. I joined Spendesk in 2019, when we were 100 people and we were not very equipped in terms of HR tools. And it was a combination of hyper growth, international growth, and also not too many people on the HR side. So I was alone at the beginning to cover the whole HR scope. And the combination of those three factors basically led me thinking that I needed a more robust system to be sure that it was more reliable. Basically, at that time, it was one tool and lots of Excel spreadsheets. So basically, it was easier for me and then more reliable to have something, everything at the same place. But it was also for me the occasion to focus my time and energy on maybe more value-added tasks rather than aggregating spreadsheets. So it was initiated, I would say, by HR, but highly supported by the business, who were seeing the value also of focusing on the time of the people team on other tasks than spreadsheets.
Yeah, getting off spreadsheets is definitely a contributor to resilience, I would say. Thanks for sharing that background. And Willem, how about at Basilea?
Yeah, Basilea too. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely HR's goal to digitalize. I mean, we had C-level support for sure, but we were just very aware of where we had inefficiencies in our own processes. And we had several systems, as Agnes also pointed out, that weren't talking to each other. So we had the same data entered manually into different systems. So to say nothing about the amount of paper also that we were using in all our processes. So we saw the benefits for us, for our employees, and also for the company as a whole. But I think in the end of the day, it was our call. we made it. And this was well before we were aware that there was a pandemic coming our way.
Fantastic. Did you succeed in getting off paper?
Oh, hugely, massively, yeah. We went from rooms full of binders to practically nothing. So,
Ross, did you want to add anything? I mean, of course, at Personio, we have digitalized HR processes, but did you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I guess from Personio's perspective, yeah, from day one, we were in the really lucky position to already have digitalization as a kind of like ground zero for our HR team. If I think back to previous organizations, the first time we really made a big shift was really based on a few factors. One was access to accurate data, because we were really struggling to figure out, simple things like how many headcount did we actually have in each location and each team. And then something that Agnes said resonated about scaling. So we were starting to think about growing our team both within one country, but then internationally. So that really prompted us to think about how could we scale the team better. And I think that the tougher thing for me initially was getting buy-in from the C-level at that time. However, when presented with a case of the investment that it would give us back in terms of freeing up people's time and also automating topics for leaders, we got buy-in in order to make the investment. So yeah, it was a kind of like shorter journey.
So you guys make it sound quite smooth. What were some of your biggest challenges over, during that transition, and in particular over the last year, and how did you surmount them? And why don't we start this time with William?
So I think over the past year especially, there's several that immediately jump to mind that all had the same cause, but also the same solution. So the cause was suddenly everybody having to drop their stuff and work from home from one day to the next. And the solution was just to make a stronger push towards digitalization. I think COVID also, for a lot of companies, also basically wrote the business case for digitalization. It was it sped up a lot. So for us, for example, we had our employees that have to record their working times. So when we used to work in the office, that was done through physical badges and terminals at the entrance to the buildings. But with everybody suddenly at home, they no longer had access to those terminals. So briefly, they had to record their times manually. So what we did afterwards, not long after everybody started working from home, was also to launch different ways for employees to record their times with the same tap in, tap out method that they were already used to. So now they're able to do it on their iPhones, or we have a button in Outlook where they can also tap in, tap out. So yeah, I think the challenges we had were not having enough time to prepare for everybody working from home, but because of the different tools we used and having already moved a lot of processes from paper-based to digital, made that shift a lot easier.
Great, thank you. Agnes, what about at Spendesk? Was it a big shift for people to start working at home, or was it more of a natural progression?
We were already pretty much remote friendly, so it was not a very, very big change, but still it was like not usual, and the 100% time of work being remote is a bit different than from time to time. So of course it was a change, and I completely rely on what Willem just said on the cause and solutions of the problem. So same, we've been digitalizing different things. Like for instance, time tracking is not necessarily something for us, but we were really worried about the time spent by Spendeskers in front of their computer, and the fact that it's very hard to disconnect at the end of the day, that you usually eat in front of your computer, and that you keep track of the time basically. So we pushed more for people to be aware of these kind of things. We took the pulse more regularly with tools. So it was like implementing a weekly pulse survey just to see if they were feeling well, if they were able to manage their time properly, if we needed new solutions, etc. So yeah, there's been different processes that we actually it was already there, but we made them more systematic, more frequent, and thanks to the different tools that we were able to use.
Yeah, makes sense. And Ross, I know we had a very smooth transition to working at home. The HR team made it look quite easy. But behind the scenes, what were some of the big challenges that you guys were facing?
Yeah, definitely the analogy of the kind of swan gliding on top of the kind of pond, and then underneath is all the activity. I think a couple of things kind of come to mind from our perspective. So one is interviewing. So obviously moving to 100% remote interviewing almost overnight, as we were, a remote friendly business and still continue to be. That created its challenges. So we were really lucky, both at Personio and in my previous company, that we had a recruiting platform that enabled us to make that process as seamless as possible. Obviously, you have to think about then, other topics like decision making and alignment, and moving from not meeting people in person. So, but the technology did help us as well. And then the other topic was onboarding. So as we continue to hire, even at a slower pace through the eye of the pandemic, we continue to onboard remotely. And I think that, having technology and some of our processes set up to do that, we made some mistakes and we learned along the way. But having kind of workflows that enabled us to, take away some of the kind of things that fall through the cracks definitely helped when you're not in person and you're not working together, in the office. So that was some of the challenges that we faced.
Okay, great. So let's move on now to the topic of organizational agility at the 3 organizations. Resilience and agility go hand in hand, being able to quickly react to changes like rapid growth or a challenging environment or even a pandemic. Being able to react and respond to those quickly and appropriately is crucial. So I would ask you, to what extent have you been able to incorporate agility and the assumption that things are going to change into your HR processes and, as you design the processes, and what advice would you give for other companies? I'll ask Willem to kick off.
Yeah, so I don't like giving out 10 out of 10s, but I think for us, it's definitely on that side of the scale. So I think when designing or redesigning a process, it's just really important to evaluate whether that process is being designed for this specific moment in time. So with a company of this exact size, using these exact systems and so on, or if you have any kind of variables that are allowed to change. So I think the more factors that you intend to presume will stay the same indefinitely, the more unresilient your process is going to be. So at the very slightest change in the company environment, it's all going to fall to pieces. So I think that pretty much every process probably has a due date at which point you're going to have to change it for whatever reason. But I think that the more agility and flexibility that you already build in when you're designing that process, the further into the future you can push that due date. So my advice to people is try to make it as unreliant on any specific factors as possible.
That's great advice. Is there any specific example that you could share? I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
No problem. Yeah, I mean, size is one to make sure that, so one of the things that we were doing, for example, in reporting, and I think this is something we're going to be talking about afterwards as well, is we had a lot of reports where, call centers were fixed and the setup was fixed, and a lot of it was done all manually. In what we do now. So, and I'll give a bit more insight on that when we talk about workforce reporting specifically, is everything is fluid and flexible. So if you need to add a few call centers here or there, that's completely fine. If you remove them, if you edit them, that doesn't actually change the process. And there's very little adaptation needed. And then the other thing is, of course, reliance on different systems. We managed to streamline that all into one. So Agnes already pointed out the spreadsheet hell. I mean, we had the exact same issues as well. So if you do it that way, even if anything were to happen to one system or we have to shift to a different one, then we can very easily do that.
Oh, great example. Thank you. And Ross, I'll put you on the spot now. Be honest, how agile would you say our HR processes are?
I would say, I think we're probably a strong 8. So I think that the team has done an amazing job, well before I arrived to really think through the eye of the user and to adapt as we've grown and we've scaled the company. I think that what we try to do is keep a kind of clarity to anything we put in place, and something that Willem said around kind of almost trying to future-proof as best you can. Obviously, you don't always know longer term, but at least try and think about where are you headed in the next few years, and what does that mean for some of the things that you do now. A couple of things that I've learned along the way. One is I try to have a product mindset into developing our processes or policies or frameworks. So really kind of like thinking about through the eye of our user, thinking about user experience, and sometimes taking like a minimal viable product approach. So kind of get a version 1, test it and trial it, and then take it from there into next stages to iterate. And gathering feedback from stakeholders. So that's something I've learned just from working in the kind of tech space. So that's worked well. And then the second part is around technology. So where you can and where you have budget or you've got a gap, I think definitely try to invest in technology or integrate the technology you have with other solutions that can help you. So if you have like, I don't know, standalone HRIS or HR platform and recruiting platform, what can you do to try and build kind of efficiencies into your processes so that they can be more resilient as your company grows, or the worst happens like last year.
And speaking of last year, Agnes, I'll direct this question to you. What initiatives and actions have you taken in your organization to help mitigate the impact of the pandemic and be more resilient? For example, implementing tools for working at home, you spoke about recently, or maybe programs to support mental health. What advice would you have for other HR folks?
Yeah, when the first lockdown kicked in, we were really focused on, our first priority was really to be sure that our people were safe, healthy, and that they remain motivated even despite the context. So having this goal in mind for the whole past year, more than usually, we've been taking different actions. So first, during the very first week, it was really to be sure that they had everything to work in the remote environment. Even if we were remote friendly, not everybody's used to that. So it was really giving tips. There were tons of different Slack channels that were created for people to share best practices, ideas, tools that they were using, etc. So there was really a very benevolent group dynamic, which was really nice to see. And further down the road, we realized that even if we were putting a lot of efforts into well-being and mental health, etc., sometimes people were still struggling with personal problems or work organizations, etc. So we tried to go a bit further. We've implemented a platform to support people on psychological topics. So basically, they have access to it without going through HR or through their managers. It's really a personal process that they are taking to reach out to either a coach or a psychologist, so they can discuss whatever problem they may have. And we really saw that even if people were comfortable getting to their manager or to HR, it was like going one step beyond and maybe tackling topics that they would feel less comfortable sharing. So it was a big step for us. And we started really regularly giving some guidelines about work-life balance, asking, as I was saying before, people to really take the time to disconnect. So we've put in place a monthly budget, so they can do whatever they want that is not work, like yoga, meditation, sports, reading. So we really try to push them towards this kind of thing. So whenever they work, they are 100% focused and actually more productive instead of falling into the trap of working more hours but being less effective.
That's
it's been a huge focus for us.
Yeah. And what was the adoption like? So, I mean, these are great benefits. Did people take advantage of it? Did you see an impact from this?
For the mental health platform, for instance, like usually when you have hotlines that you can call for crises and things like that, I think the usage rate is around 2% of the workforce. And right now it's still in place. And I think we have 35% of people using the platform. So even if it's not 100%, still a huge impact Plus, even people who are not using it are really seeing like the opportunity, if they need it, to have it at some point. And for the other activities, virtual team buildings, or any disconnection activity that we've had, usually we always have like more than 50% of the people participating, which I think is a very good sign.
Yeah, that's a great number. And I think that's a great point too, that even if people don't take advantage of it, knowing it's there, people appreciate that, and it creates some security. Thank you for sharing that. Ross, I've seen you nodding vigorously. Would you like to add anything from a Personio perspective?
Yeah, it was great to hear kind of all the things that Spendesk are doing. I think that when I talk to my network of HR teams and leaders, there's been lots of different things that have been tried, and I think you have to fit what works well for the company and the culture. A few things that we've worked on is we had a home office task force that was set up quite early in the pandemic, and that was a cross-functional team who helped to really think about what are the topics, after we set people up to work remotely and had like home office kit, and we're kind of like going through online yoga, and what were the next level initiatives that we needed to put in place. And how to really help people be healthy and sustainable, and also have great work-life balance. When we came back into the second part of the pandemic with lockdown, I think it hit a lot of people really hard. I know it hit me personally. And what we then was, we took a kind of fresh look at it. And we looked at kind of like, more deeper level of like counseling and healthcare options. We talked about it as a company, like quite openly and vulnerably. And I think that helped a dialogue happen within different departments and teams. So we really tried to kind of role model that from Hanno, our CEO, through the all team that we have weekly. And then we initiated a couple of virtual health weeks, which we had in February. We had about 65% of our employees take part in one or more events, which was great. So it's not for everyone, but really, it's there if people need it, as you said, Laura. And then finally, we introduced self-care half days from February, March and April. And the reason for that was we wanted people to really have some time that wasn't a holiday, that they could take with their family or whoever they lived with or on their own, to really do something good to themselves. And that has it's been taken up really well. I think we've had about half of our employees have already taken one in February. So yeah, there's no silver bullet, but I think that you have to find the right topics or the right initiatives that work for your company and your culture, essentially.
Yeah, and I can just chime in and second that the self-care days are a great initiative. I've taken my first one; it was fantastic, and knowing the organization cares goes a long way. So I'm loving these stories. So let's now turn our focus to building a future-ready workforce, which I think is a particularly interesting question in light of the last months when things were just a little bit weird. But of course, we still have to think about the future of the organization. So let's talk about resilience and future ready. So having the right people, the right skills in place, and the right culture to support them so they can continue to grow and up level and be ready for future challenges. So how do you at your organizations create a supportive work culture and also hire employees who want to grow with the business, and maybe with that nuance of you can't necessarily interview people face to face in the current climate, so there's that that additional challenge. How have you managed that over the last months? Willem, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest threat to resilience, like from a process point of view at least, I mentioned before about the different variables that change, and it could be any one of those, but the biggest one by far, I think, is people that grow very stuck to them over time, which is not, anything against any people or, a certain type of people. I think it's anybody that, is used to a process for a longer period of time, gets used to it, and then gets blind to some of the flaws and some of the inefficiencies. So I think the easiest way to tackle that is just to get a fresh pair of eyes on those processes. And then there's different ways to do that. I think if you're talking about from a hiring point of view, I think maybe it's not always a bad thing to maybe hire people that may not be as experienced, but instead have a completely different viewpoint than the people that have been working with those processes for years and years. And the other thing that you can do outside of the hiring process is try to maybe set up the team so you've got different people working together. So it's not always the same teams and the same set of eyes constantly on process, but to kind of mix it up. And I think that any kind of process that has fresh eyes on it on a regular basis is bound to be a lot more resilient than one that's kind of done behind closed doors.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. How about at Spendesk, Agnes?
I completely agree on this one. Like, to me, the first thing to make sure that the culture is supportive and resilient is that we don't take it for granted and reassess it constantly. So even if it's very present and strong, you want to be sure that you challenge it from time to time to be sure that it's still the right one. And the second thing to me is really to make sure that actually everyone is responsible for that. Of course, it's coming from the founders, it's promoted by the leadership team, etc. But it's also everybody's responsibility in the company to make sure that this culture is supportive and that everyone is actually finding their place in there. So we are really putting, like, ownership is one of our values, and it starts with the ownership of the culture, the ownership of your self-development, etc. So we really try to put that at the core of our values and our culture. And finally, I think it's just being sure that it's embedded in the day-to-day. So any new process, might it be, or review of process, might it be hiring, onboarding, performance review, or whatever process or project you start, should start with your core values, the pillars you want to build your culture on, to be sure that it will be supporting everyone in the end.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now drilling down into the specific situation of the last months, how have your people development strategies changed over the last year, and what were some of the challenges you faced, and how did you work past them? How about you, Ross? Why don't you kick off?
Yeah, so I think like most companies, almost a lot of our people development strategies froze overnight again, because a lot of what we did in my previous company, and I know Personio, was done in person. So you had that opportunity taken away. And I think the focus went on how to kind of protect the company, how to support employees, and how to make sure everyone's healthy and well. I think then very quickly at Personio, we then thought about how do we move things kind of online. So that was one part in terms of kind of continuing to put kind of development and growth around resilience at the kind of top of our list. So that was kind of an adapting of existing kind of products that we had, like our onboarding experience, for example, or even our leadership development, which was just starting to roll out our new program at the tail end of or middle of last year. And then I think now what we've been thinking about is, okay, we have, work. What happens is you kind of like can't just stop, because the company, is continuing to grow, and, our employees, want to continue to develop. So we're looking at ways around, we have career maps for each of our departments with role expectations. So how do we then bring them together into kind of an overall kind of career map and kind of overview for the company? So it helps people understand, what's expected, what are some of the common skills and experiences. And we're using that now as a bit of a needs analysis to then develop some kind of core skills that we're going to roll out to everyone at Personio will have the chance to take part. And these are things that will help people be even more kind of competent, capable, and resilient in the kind of hybrid world that we're going to be moving to in the future. So that's just been some of the learnings that we had so far.
Great, thank you. Agnes, what about at Spendesk?
Well, I think that we all had the same issue at the beginning, is that everything froze. But the main thing, I think, was that we really had to reprioritize lots of things. So when maybe before we had the opportunity to be a bit ahead of track and think about nice to have and start to plan a bit in advance, we had really to focus on the top priorities and so remote and the whole setup that people had was the first priority, and then the other things that we were able to do were maybe lagging a bit behind. as Ross just mentioned, we are at a stage where like reaching a bit more than 200 people being here for 4 years, they start to think about their next step, how they are going to evolve and grow, etc. So it was we really had a big focus also on the whole career development part and how we can actually project them a bit further than 3 months or 6 months in. So it was one of our biggest priorities after the whole crisis management.
Yeah, I love how you both said everything froze, and then you figured out how to pick it up again. I mean, that's a pretty good definition of resilience, actually. Willem, did you want to add anything to this question? Challenges over the last year with development strategies.
Yeah, so once again, everything froze. But the other thing that happened was you miss out with everybody working remotely. I think you also miss out on some really valuable informal interactions that you normally get around a coffee machine, for example. So it also means that people might not be as quick to provide feedback after a meeting or a project as they would be if they were together in the same room. Or for people to have development discussions with their line managers. So although we hope that it won't be too long before we can, return to the offices and those won't be issues anymore. I mean, as I've said before, if you want resilient processes, then you can't rely on factors, and face-to-face interactions being one of those. So I think technology and digitalization has a big role to play here for us, at least. So to make it easier for those conversations to happen as a result of those tools and processes that support it. Make it easy as possible, maybe give nudges, etc. And that way, if we do end up going back to the office and the development processes that we used to have work, then obviously that's great. And then if we don't, then that's also okay. So I think that's, more or less the definition of a resilient process there.
Absolutely. All right. So one final question. We're moving on to the topic of strategic workforce insights. So one last question for all the panelists, and then we'll take questions from our audience. How has your use of workforce reporting changed over the last 12 months? And to what extent has having the workforce insight impacted your resilience? Let's start with Agnes.
Well, as we said already on several topics, I think that the main change is that we've been using more and more tools, and so you're using these tools, it really helped us to automate more the reports we were using, to have it a bit more systematic. So it was more, we had more data, it was more reliable, and it really helped us to anticipate and again prioritize on the topics that were really the core issues that we had at the right time. Before that, I think we were able to more or less guess what would be the problem. With more reporting, with more reporting, we were able to predict what would be the issue a bit more strongly and safely, I would say. So this way we've been able to focus on performance management when it was the right time, on mental health when it was the right time, then on career visibility. So in the end, all the different reports that we are able to automate and put in place is what's driving us on the day-to-day in the end.
Yeah. All right, great, thank you. And Willem, I know you started talking about reporting a little earlier, so why don't you finish that thought now?
Yeah, I think for us, the biggest change in terms of workforce reporting is that we basically moved away from reporting for the sake of reporting. So pharma as an industry is very heavily regulated. So it's really important to have historical data on file for whenever you've got an audit. And in the past, one way of preserving that historical data was to send out reports. So for example, on a monthly basis to a defined group of people. Now, the thing is that some of those reports that we would produce and we'd send out, they would just be filed away by the people that we sent them to, and nothing would really happen with those reports. So by moving all data out of spreadsheets and into a cloud-based system means that you have the historical data available on demand whenever you want it. So all of a sudden, you don't need most of those reports anymore. So if there's ever a need for that data, you can go ahead and pull it, even if it's for a period that was in the past. But it means that it's no longer something you're doing for the sake of doing it, which is big. And I think the other thing is that by having all data in one place, it's also a lot easier to get the data that you need to gain insights, both on your workforce and also in terms of operational excellence as an HR function.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I see Ross nodding. Ross, do you want to add something on the topic of organizational reporting?
Yeah, I think we've, obviously being in a position at Personio, we've had access to our employee data from the beginning, as we said earlier. I think what changed though was the kind of awareness that leads and leaders in teams wanted to have around what was happening, because they couldn't see their teams like on a day-to-day basis, like as regularly as they were. So kind of having access to data and insights was really key for them. So figuring out how to make that more accessible, but most importantly for my team to start using different data sources and correlating them to start to draw insight. So if you look at potentially absence trends or data together with our engagement pulse data, to really dive into, are there any kind of like heat hotspots for teams that might need a bit more support, or where the leader of that area might need to support their leads or the team directly. So that was one part. And then I think the bit that I got kind of excited about was in scenario planning and for the future now. So in business planning, as we look ahead each year, like, how are we going to grow? What do our customers need? And then what impact that has on, our people, our current headcount, our hiring and forecasting models. So we use our people data at the center of that. So working really closely with our finance colleagues and also the leaders from the different departments. So that really helps has helped the people team think about kind of the future more, rather than be in the tactical, right now. So kind of two different aspects from our side.
Great. Well, thank you all three for those insights. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Q&A chat box. It looks like we already have some questions. We're looking to move to a fully integrated finance and payroll HR system. Any suggestions for medium-sized businesses? Who would like to answer that?
I think the tricky thing is that as Personio users, we by definition don't have a fully integrated system that incorporates all of that. So we went for a different solution. We went for kind of a best of breed. So we picked whichever system we wanted to use, and usability was very important for us in choosing such a system. If you want to go for all-in-one as a medium-sized business, I think the temptation is to jump right to SAP or one of those massive ERP giants. But if we were to go for a system which had everything in it, the one that I quite like for smaller, medium-sized businesses, which has everything in it, is Sage, which is also very strong in the people side of things, but just very different from Personio. Personio is very much out of the box and anyone can use it, whereas Sage is very much do it yourself. So that's one of the reasons why, even if we had to re-choose an HRS provider, we wouldn't pick Sage for that reason. But if you're looking for something, all in one, then it's something that you can have a look at.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, the organizations that suffered most during these tough times were organizations that never empowered their employers prior to the breakdown. That's an interesting point. Having a culture of empowerment, defined delegation of authorities, had a clear way forward. It's easy for organizations to work anonymously. I'm not sure this is a question. It seems to be more of an observation, but I would invite the panelists to comment on this, that organizations that were empowering people before the pandemic had an advantage.
Yeah, I definitely say so. Talking to people I've been lucky to work in organizations like Personio, where empowerment and autonomy and ownership is at the heart of the business. But I have colleagues and friends that work in other companies where that's not the case. So they've had to really rethink kind of part of not just how they work, but who they are as they come out into a post-pandemic world. Because people have seen that how their organizations have looked after them or not, and therefore they have choices that they may want to make in the future. So I think if organizations aren't already thinking about that they should be, because sadly what may happen is they could lose some of the talent that they have because of how the last year has maybe unfolded for them internally. So
yeah, great point. Anything, Agnes, Willem, anything you want to add on that?
I completely agree on this one. I mean, somehow I think that if you have to make this process of redefining who you are during the pandemic, it's like just adding a very tough discussion and a very tough topic on top of the pile. So if you already had that in place before, it's probably something that you were able to rely on during these difficult times. So it was definitely a good strength to have beforehand.
Okay, great.
I also think that there's a growing awareness of the benefits of moving the decision-making power down the chain. So it's the people that do the work that actually have the freedom and power to say how they're going to do it. Yeah. I think in the past, you had so many approval steps and committees, etc. And the companies have moved away from that and let people, on the ground make those decisions. Yeah, they're a lot more flexible. And I think then when something happens like a pandemic, it saves up a lot of time and makes you a lot more flexible. So I fully agree with that observation.
Yeah, that's a great case to be made for organizational agility. The more flexibility you can offer people who are on the front line, the more flexibly you can react when something like this comes up. It's a great insight. All right, we sometimes hear from employees who are suffering from loneliness or isolation at home that going back to the office would solve everything. Mm-hmm. What do you do to create a feeling of connection while people are at home and having a social circle at work despite people working remotely?
I can take this one maybe on our side. Well, in France, we had the chance that we were able to open slightly the office. So there are people who are really need to go back to the office who were able to do so, and clearly it changed everything for them. For others who were just missing the social interactions, we really tried to recreate some moments. So of course, spending a moment with your colleagues in front of your computer will never replace the fact that you're in the office having a chat, etc. But we tried to recreate those moments. At the beginning, it was a bit forced, so we had a bot pairing people 2 by 2 every morning for random coffees or things like that. I think that everybody did that. But with time, we realized that we had some ambassadors in the company who were really pushing for that and helping others, etc. So we really also relied on people in the company to push for this kind of links. And actually, again, it's a question of empowerment, but it's not only the people team or the management team topics to lead, but it's really in each team to create those moments, to have one person responsible for the social time of the team for 1 week or for 1 month, and being sure that it becomes something that is natural and not very top down and company events, etc. So I think it's really raising awareness on the difficulties of some to be sure that others are really helping and supporting them.
Okay, I'm going to actually put an addendum on this question before I invite you guys to comment, because I just noticed a chat popping up specifically calling out networking, which is a little bit different. Networking is often recommended as a tactic for furthering your career, finding a mentor in the organization, learning, etc. Obviously, it's a little more challenging to network from home. So I want to invite Willem and Ross, as you respond to the question, to maybe keep networking in mind. Is anything going on in your company specifically to make it easier to network?
So we have a thing on a Monday morning. So we get together every Monday as a whole team, and we do a thing called Metrics Monday, where each one of the departments will do kind of a 10-minute update on kind of some KPIs from that area. And then the second part is we put everyone into a kind of like paired kind of coffee roulette. So you get to connect with someone in the company you don't know. And we found that's been a great way for people just to connect, like to spend time with one another. And I've met so many people who you probably wouldn't meet on a day-to-day basis because the company, has grown so much. And then we have other things where we have times where people get together for kind of lunches. And then we encourage people, through our planning process to connect afterwards to share, if they've got questions or ideas about another area's plan or OKRs, their goals. It's not foolproof because I think, networking, some people enjoy it, some people don't. What we try to do is offer a few different options whilst we're working in this way. And then, hopefully in the future, we'll be able to have other options where we can bring people together in our office in a safe way, but also recognize that we will always have employees who are working remotely or partly remotely. So how do we bring them in? So it's really rethinking kind of how we do stuff as a company to keep networks connected.
Yeah, great. Willem, did you want to say anything about?
Yeah, just that it's a very tricky one to solve. I remember that earlier on the pandemic, so in the first wave, so in the spring of 2020, there was a whole lot of momentum around this, and people are doing virtual yoga mornings and Friday after work drinks and all virtual. And we, as a company, also very much encouraged and set up these kind of events. I think that since the second and third waves, a lot of that energy has kind of run its course, and people are kind of tired of virtual pub quizzes, etc. So, yeah, I think it's a very tough one. I think that you hear about people being lonely and feel very isolated, and despite our best efforts at trying to get people together virtually, yeah, you can tell that it's definitely taken its toll on people, and there's not a whole lot of virtual coffee mornings we can set up to fix that.
Yeah, well, I'm good. I think we have time for one final question. In the chat, there's a question about, and this is a great question about resilience. I'm sorry, it's a question about engagement, engagement and resilience. So how would you say engagement has leveled at your companies? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Has it stayed the same? And what have you done specifically around promoting employee engagement?
I could maybe touch on Personio to kick us off. So we have seen a slight decline in overall engagement since we did our previous kind of engagement survey, but that was quite a while ago. So we're about to move to a pulse survey that we'll do more frequently, as well as an annual overview. So that's kind of happening right now. I think there was definitely some themes that we've wanted to keep focusing on, and so we've continued with that because we felt that even during the pandemic, there were topics that were important to our employees outside of keeping healthy and well and supported. So we try to keep that business as usual. So when we do our next pulse, I'm hopeful that we'll see some of the impact of some of the work that a lot of teams have done. When we did we had like a pulse survey for the pandemic, and actually we've seen the results improve over time. And I thought they would continue to decline. Actually, since we did our last survey and our most recent one, actually we feel people are more informed, they feel more supported by their leader, and actually they see Personio as a company and caring about them as much as possible. So for me, that was a really pleasant surprise. I didn't expect it, if I'm being honest. But I think it's testament to the kind of humility that everyone's feeling right now, that it's like, we're in this like final kind of like, we can see the end, which makes it that bit harder. So I think that definitely played into it. So yeah, that's kind of some of the things that we've seen at Personio.
Yeah, great. How about at Spendesk, Agnes?
Well, I think that we've seen ups and downs, but overall it's quite stable if we compare 1 year ago and today. I think that basically there are two things. The first one is that the situation was so unknown and that we had no precedent. We didn't know what we were facing, that we relied a lot on asking people what they thought, where they stand, what were they expecting from us, etc. So it really helped us to be sure that we were giving them the good answers or the good solutions that they were expecting. And the second one is that it also pushed us to communicate more. I think everybody felt into this over-communication path. And in the end, it was actually something positive because it gave more visibility to people. They felt that they had more access to information and knowledge. So in the end, it drove also improvements at the company level. So it helped us and supported the engagement. But yeah, I really think that the fact that the first thing we did showed that we cared for people, that we wanted them to be safe, healthy, and that was the #1 priority. And then we focused also on performance and visibility, giving them visibility on the economic situation on our side, really helped us to keep a strong engagement in the teams.
Yeah, makes sense. Similar at Basilea or different?
No, very similar. And I think Ross also pointed out this whole "we're in this together" thing is something that was quite strong. You find some pockets of the company that struggle more so than others with working from home, with the isolation. But I think overall, the fact that we've been able to keep things running, and we've also shown a lot of flexibility and compassion for people in the situation that they're in, I think has actually brought us a lot of goodwill. I think that people previously might not have given us that amount of credit that we would be able to so quickly shift the way we work and how we do things and how we managed to keep everything moving. I think one interesting thing that we noticed as well was that I think if you would have tried to predict ahead of time what would have happened, you might have had some cynical line managers that think, okay, well, people are going to move at home, you know, they've got their office here and they've got Netflix right there, and you're going to see a massive drop in productivity. Whereas actually, you know, in hindsight, one of our biggest issues has been the exact opposite. It's like, how do you tell people to stop working? Because, you know, it's been a very busy time for us, but, you know, how do you get people to, because normally people leave the office and they can leave their work there. But here you see that people find it tricky sometimes to resist that temptation to quickly check some emails after dinner. Before you know it, they get sucked in until late at night again. So it's actually been the opposite issue.
So maybe that'll be next year's or this year's development topic.
Exactly.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time, so we'll do a quick wrap up, and I will invite everyone. I'll give you information to sign up for our Digital Hug event. So quick wrap up. First of all, thank you so much to our panelists for these fantastic insights. It's been a really interesting discussion. And to sum up some of the key points, the foundation for organizational resilience is operational excellence. This is supported by digitalizing your HR people and processes. Digitalization supports organizational agility. It provides a single source of truth. You can quickly identify hotspots, as was mentioned in the call, and implement change across the organization quickly. Resilience, of course, depends on having the right people with the right skills in the right place who are able to adapt as the business changes. And, you know, as we've heard from our panelists, digitalizing HR processes helps HR to build a future-ready workforce. And finally, having access to reliable people data is a game changer for companies that have to respond to unexpected situations like a pandemic. So that wraps up our event today. I hope this discussion has provided participants with some valuable food for thought. If you'd like to participate in more discussions like this, please do register for our Hug Digital event on May 18th and 19th. I'm going to show you a QR code so you can register very quickly. Thank you again for joining us today. Thank you again to our panelists for your fantastic insights, and everyone have a great rest of your day.